Our speaker today is no stranger to DSA, although it's been a few years since he was a member here. In 2013, he and his family moved to Arizona. Michael Calcano is an Oregon native and a retired public school teacher. God bless him. And a former member of DSA for over a dozen years before he moved there to Arizona, as we said. He currently serves as vice president of both the Gila and the Navajo divisions of the Arizona Origin Science Association, and he speaks regularly on biblical apologetics. His topic today, very interesting. Yeah, but who wrote the software? So, Michael, come up and share.
Thank you, Steve. Of all the introductions I've ever had, that one is the most recent. I didn't make that up. I actually borrowed that from Rich Little, okay? So let's see what we got here. And assuming the technology is going to behave for us today. Thank you all for turning out. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. It's fun to be back here. It was almost 10 years ago, last time I spoke to a live audience. Last January, we did an online remote thing from the Pike Studios. But it's nice to have a live audience here to be able to present. And you took the time to come out this morning. I appreciate that. Yeah, but who wrote the software? Why do critters behave the way they do if not to give glory to the Creator? That's what we're going to be studying today. And compared to God, we're all dummies. Now, I'm not saying that to insult anybody, but an infinite God has infinite knowledge, and our knowledge is very, very finite. So, but we're going to take this idea of programming today. Many years ago, it's been a long, long time, and I believe it was an Acts and Facts article that I read, and it said that, as creationists, we have amassed an incredible amount of information about irreducible complexity, about critters and how they're formed and how they function and what they do from a physical standpoint. But the author said, but equally as amazing is the behaviors that animals have that's programmed into them. He says we need to look at the software aspect of how critters behave. And I thought that was a really good topic, so I took that issue and I filed it away in a drawer. And then over the years, somehow, between moving and such, it kind of got misplaced. But in the back of my mind was that, someday I want to talk about software. And so after a while, it was about a year or so ago, I said, I think I'm ready to put this together. So we did. I've got a couple of video clips with some audio, so we're going to do a little audio check here for you. Starting with some of these people. Let's see what they have to say.
Bye-bye, boys.
Have fun storming the castle.
Think it'll work?
It would take a miracle. Bye-bye.
It would take a miracle. Well, it would take a miracle for microbes to man evolution to happen. But the whole reason for Darwin's theory was to do away with miracles, to do away with God. Well, I have to say, God has worked more than a few miracles in my life, and I praise Him for that, and again, for the opportunity to address all of you today. And by the way, if you have phones that you may want to put on airplane mode or mute or whatever, now would be a good time, because for the sake of you, I don't want you to get embarrassed, if have something go off like that. So, as a former educator, oftentimes it's good to let the students know what they're going to be learning for the day, so that when I quiz you later, you'll be prepared. You have some introductions, some acknowledgments to make, and then we want to talk about the purpose of this presentation. I'm going to take you through a little example of examining the evidence, which some of you may be familiar with because I'm borrowing this from another source. Understanding animal instincts, examples of instincts in creatures. I'm going to give you one more incredible software example. And then our conclusion, what insights can we draw from the body of evidence that we'll be looking at? And then to provide you with a few resources. That being said, here's a little bit about me. I am Michael Calcano. I was born August 10th, 1955, in the City of Roses at Good Samaritan Hospital. I had my born-again experience in January of '81 after running into a few hard knocks that I couldn't seem to get around. I found a church and was baptized later that year. Prior to that, though, I had served for 4 years in the United States Navy as an electrician's mate. I got out of the Navy, and a friend talked me to join the Army National Guard, where I served for 6 more years, some of it part-time, some of it full-time. I left all that to go to college. I spent 2 years at Mount Hood Community College, then graduated from Portland State University in December of '86 with a degree in education. I taught in Oregon public schools for a little over 17 years. Moved to Arizona in early 2013, and then just a few months later, I joined the Arizona Origin Science Association. And one or two people out here got my Christmas card. This is a picture of my wife and myself recently on a little road trip we took to New Mexico. Some acknowledgments. I like to let people know where the inspiration for me doing what I'm doing came from. Top of the list is a name that everybody in the Northwest should be familiar with if they're not already. And I owe a great deal of what I do to the inspiration I got from Dr. Donald Chittick. Answers in Genesis, of course. There's another fella here named Rick Thompson. I think some of you know him. Job Martin. Bruce Malone, Search for the Truth Ministries. I understand Bruce Malone will be coming and speaking here like December, November? Something like that, because I just had him in January speaking in Arizona for us. And he is a big part of what today's talk is going to be about specifically. Creation Ministries International, Dr. Thomas Kindle from the Northwest also. He'll be my guest speaker in April, and then he'll be passing back by here later. So say hi to him for me when you see him. Institute for Creation Research. Kevin Anderson from the Creation Research Society. And of course you folks, the Design Science Association in Portland. I want to make a dedication to this gentleman here. I don't know how many of you received word, but on January 16th of this year, Dr. Kevin Anderson, the head of research for the Creation Research Society, passed away. And he was a friend of mine. I had him speak for me several times in Arizona. I've met together with him and his wife, Diane. We've had meals together. He's been a guest overnight at our house. And his passing was a shock to a lot of people. Not just for many reasons. He's a good Christian friend. But he was also the head of research, so the Creation Research Society now has to find somebody to fill his shoes, which is going to be a tough task. But the good news in all that is that his eternal destiny is secure, and we can rejoice in that. So this is the first talk I've given since learning of his passing, so I wanted to dedicate today's talk to this dear friend. I also need to talk just a bit about the Arizona Origin Science Association. This is our logo. This is the address to our website. This is a picture of what the website looks like. And just to tell you briefly about it, we actually have 7 different divisions across the state of Arizona in these various cities. Lake Havasu City, we have them named by the county that they're in. So we have the Mojave Division, we have the Yavapai Division in Prescott, we have the Maricopa Division in Phoenix, and also, actually, they meet in Glendale and Tempe. We have the Pima Division in Tucson, the Cochise Division in Sierra Vista, and then I handle these 2 divisions here in Payson and in Sholo, Arizona, which are the Gila and Navajo divisions. So about a year and a half ago, my wife and I, a couple years ago, we sold our house, and we moved to a community called Heber, Arizona, which on the map would be located right about there. It's actually 2 communities, Heber and Overgard, side by side. We live at 6,700 feet elevation, which in Oregon would put us above Timberline Lodge. But we have lots of pine trees and juniper trees and even a few oak trees there. And perfect in all seasons. Well, near perfect, okay. But So the purpose of this presentation this morning is to build up your faith in the authority of the Word of God. To put it another way, does God say what he means, and does he mean what he says? And I also want to provide you with a few helpful resources on the topic of biblical creation versus evolution, and how to defend the authority of Scripture, because really, that's what it's all about. When I'm speaking to a group of people, many of them for the first time, I let them know, I said, this isn't just to give you interesting tidbits of information that you can share with other Christians at a potluck or something. This is how you can take this information and use it to share the gospel with other people. But my father was a produce farmer. He grew vegetables out in Troutdale. And he didn't just plant seeds. Before he could plant the seeds, he had to plow the ground and till the ground and weed the ground and fertilize the ground, and then he could plant the seeds. And sometimes when you're working with people in the workplace or neighbors or coworkers or sometimes family members, sometimes you have to break up the tough ground first. And so the things that I'm going to share with you today, hopefully you'll be able to find a way to use some of that to help break up the ground, to challenge people's thinking about the gospel and the authority of Scripture. Romans 1, verse 20 tells us, this is a familiar verse to many people, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Now, this expression, from what has been made, shows up one other time in the Greek in the New Testament, only one other time, and that is found in Ephesians 2, verse 10, where it says, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. This idea of workmanship denotes a workman. A workman is somebody who crafts something. So what Romans 1:20 tells us is that God's workmanship is clearly seen. And God can't lie. So when God says his workmanship is clearly seen, that means it is clearly seen. By whom? By everyone. So that what? So that people are without excuse. So, in other words, no one has any excuse for not seeing God's workmanship in the things of nature and not giving him the praise that he's due. Well, at this point, then, we ask the question, can workmanship be a non-material product? Many years ago, when I was a remedial math teacher, I produced a lot of non-material products in the form of computer programs, which were stored on, 5¼ floppy disks. It's okay to chuckle, that's all right. I never made a nickel off of any of the things I produced, but it did help me with my job. And these 5¼ floppy disks ran on Apple II computers. Yeah, like that one. So anyway, so understanding the idea that software, and you didn't just randomly type things on the keyboard and expect it to come out. You had to put thought into how this is going to all play out, how this is going to work, how it's going to do what it needs to do. All right, I'm going to take you now to this little thing called examining the evidence. And here's where I'm going to refer back to Dr. Donald Chittick. I learned this from him, and I think it's important. Now, all of you here, you've probably been through something like this before, so shouldn't be that big of a deal. But I have to keep it in the program because I might give this to somebody who has never heard this before. But basically, how does a scientist or anyone examine evidence? Because everyone has a starting point for their thinking. And you can call it a bias or faith or presupposition or a paradigm or an axiom or a worldview. They all mean essentially the same thing. So the question then becomes, what are our bias options? And there are only two. Either the Bible is true or the Bible is not true. So we take a particular body of evidence because we all have the same evidence to look at. And so the person whose bias is that the Bible is true would look at a piece of evidence, whether it's a fossil or a rock layer or something, and they would say, I see creative intelligence and evidence of a worldwide flood. Whereas the person who wants to be the skeptic, who wants to believe that there is no supernatural element to life, would look at the same body of evidence and say, well, what I see here are random processes operating over long periods of time. And we have to understand that everybody, including scientists, have a bias for their thinking. As much as they would like us to believe that they don't, they do. So the question that we have to ask is, does the evidence agree with reality? Because either everything was created or everything created itself, and there cannot be two realities. Sometimes we hear people say, well, that's your truth, I have my truth. Well, no, there's only one truth. You can have a lot of different falsehoods, but there is only one truth. There is only one reality. One of these options is true, the other is fantasy, people, and truth is that which conforms to reality. So, since you took the trouble to come out here this morning, we're going to assume that you all have a basic understanding of the Bible being the foundation for our thinking in every area. Although skeptics are welcome to come. And we have a few that show up to our meetings once in a while to check us out, and I'm happy to say that, well, I have had some people walk out of some of my meetings, but that just means that they were stuck with what to think about. And I say, I don't feel bad that they walked out. I feel bad for them because they're obviously struggling with something here. So let's do what we can to gently and graciously try to help people see that there is a reality that's centered on God's Word. So to borrow from Answers in Genesis, we're going to put on our biblical glasses. And in every area that we study, we will view everything through the perspective that the Bible's account of history and therefore science is true. And if something appears to contradict the Bible, we do not rush to accept that, knowing that sinful mankind is in rebellion against God and His Word, and we'll hold off until we get more evidence. But in the meantime, we ground ourselves on God's Word. So, we're going to be talking about instincts today. Well, to set the foundation for that, let's start with the definition of instinct so we know exactly how we're going to look at this. Definition of instinct: 1, a natural or inherent aptitude, impulse, or capacity. 2a, a largely inheritable and unalterable tendency of an organism to make a complex and specific, keep that in mind, complex and specific response to environmental stimuli without involving reason. You do it because you do it. And B, behavior that is mediated by reactions below the conscious level. This comes from Merriam-Webster's online dictionary. Or to put it another way, instincts can be compared to the basic input-output system, commonly called the BIOS, that is programmed into a computer's motherboard during its assembly. It is a set of instructions that directs the computer how to respond to certain types of input from its environment. This set of instructions is independent from additional software that is installed later, such as Windows, Apple's, Linux, etc. Okay? We're good so far? Basic programming, hardwired into the critter. Or to put it another way, where there is evidence of design, there must be an intelligent designer. Where there is evidence of a program, there must be an intelligent programmer. So, let's begin by asking the question, who wrote the software for the Tailorbird? Has anybody heard of the Tailorbird before? It's not common around these parts, so it's okay if you haven't. Why is it called the Tailorbird, you might ask? Well, because it stitches its nest out of leaves. It uses spider silk and grass to make the stitches. There are 13 different species in the genus. I'm not going to try to read all these for you, okay? That'd be like tongue twister on steroids. And here is its range, its habitat: India, Thailand, Malaysia, some parts of Indonesia. So what about this bird that makes it so interesting? Well, let's take a look. The little mother bird, she's gathered her raw material to make her nest: spider silk, threads, some grasses. She knows how to take her bill and perforate a hole into the leaf and then push the thread through and then pull it through. And she takes this cluster of leaves, sews them together to make like a little basket that she can then lay her eggs in and use as her nest. I ordered a suit recently from Men's Warehouse, and there needed to be some alterations. And I hope that the lady who's making the alterations just doesn't randomly start sewing things together. I'm going to assume that she knows what she's doing, since I'm paying for the suit anyway. Actually, my wife put on her card, but it's the same idea. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a little bit of questions about the Taylor bird. You know how in Job, when God steps into the narrative, he asks Job a series of questions? Well, I'm going to throw out a series of questions too, just for us to contemplate. Where did the Taylor bird learn how to perforate the leaves with its bill and thread the spider silk and grass through, and in such a way as to create a suitable cubby to build her nest? Because when the baby birds get ready to fly, they don't see the mom building the nest, but yet the mother birds then, when they become at the right age, they know how to build the nest. The knowledge of how to do that process is passed on somehow through an egg into a baby chick, into a full-grown bird. How does the Taylor bird know which kinds of materials have the right properties with which to stitch her nest together? I'm talking about the design of the structure, the flexibility that you need, the strength that you need. If you use the wrong materials, those seams will pop and the babies will fall out and no more baby Taylor birds, right? How many Taylor bird nests fell apart, causing the baby birdies to plummet to their deaths before evolution finally, through random, unguided, naturalistic processes, enabled the birds to accomplish this amazing ability? That is a hypothetical question, of course. I want to point out the fact that it is absurd to think that the birds just happened to come upon this skill, and then even if you gave them that, how does that information get passed on to the next generation? It has to get passed on through the genetic transfer, somehow is encoded into that baby's DNA, so that when that chick grows up, it knows how to do this task. All right? Example number 1. Let's move on now and ask the question, who wrote the software for the whippoorwill? Whippoorwills don't inhabit this area of the country. They inhabit another area, which I'll show you, but the whippoorwill bird has some very interesting characteristics. The scientific name is Androstomus vociferus. Sounds almost like the roadrunner coyote, they have to put the thing in there. Inhabits central and southeastern Canada and the eastern United States. It catches insects in flight at night, and it sleeps during the day. Well, that's interesting enough. I wouldn't want to stay up at night catching bugs. They begin their nightly foraging about 30 minutes after sunset and continue until it is too dark to continue, then resume again at first light, ceasing about 40 minutes before the sunrise. So they have their own very distinct schedule for when they're going to go out and collect their food. They build no nest, but they lay a clutch of 2 eggs directly on leaf litter on the forest floor. Is there anything else peculiar about this bird? Oh, yes, indeed, or I wouldn't have bothered to put it in this talk. Yes, the female lays her eggs at a time when they will hatch exactly 10 days prior to the next full moon. Why is this? The young hatchlings are out their developmental hungriest at 10 days, and the parents must spend all night in their foraging for food for themselves and for their young. How does the whippoorwill know the gestational period for her eggs for them to hatch 10 days in advance of a full moon? Does anybody tell mommy bird, by the way, it's going to take X number of days for your eggs to hatch, and you got to keep an eye on the sky so that you can lay your eggs so that 10 days can pass, then they'll hatch, and then 10 days later when there's a full moon, your babies are going to be so hungry, you're going to have to spend all night feeding them. There's no way you can tell a bird that. That has to be programmed into the bird. How does the whippoorwill know that the young will be as hungry as ever on the 10th day after hatching? Again, this is programmed into not just the mother, but the father, because he's out collecting food for the babies as well. How does that knowledge get passed on to each successive generation of whippoorwills? How many generations of whippoorwill birdies starved or suffered from adolescent malnutrition before evolution finally brought them to this point? Now, I said we don't have whippoorwills, but when I grew up, and my father had farmland out in Troutdale, I used to hear the Bob Whites. But I'm not sure if there are even any of those still around. Probably are a few, but I have an audio recording. That's actually a video, but it was taken at night anyway, to give you an example of how the whippoorwill's call sounds. All righty, you ready to move on to the next one? Who wrote the software for the Blackpool Warbler? Blackpool Warbler. Haven't heard about those over in Oregon? Well, no, they don't exist over here. The average adult migrating Blackpool Warbler weighs about 12 to 15 grams, which is not very much. They spend their summers in southern Canada from the Great Lakes to Maine and the Maritime provinces. They migrate in winter to Venezuela and Colombia in South America, making the trip in about 3 days of non-stop flying. How does a little bird like this have enough energy to fly from Canada and the Great Lakes area and Maine all the way down to South America, 3 days non-stop? Well, they know a little secret. They bulk up, first of all, for their migration on the East Coast between North Carolina and Maine. And they do not take the most direct route to get there. What route do they take? Believe it or not, they fly southeastward out over the Atlantic Ocean. And from there, they catch a catch a jet stream current, which then allows them to basically coast down to South America. And the advantage of this is also they get to avoid predatory birds that might go after them. So they don't take the most direct route. They fly east to go south. Does that, at first blush, that wouldn't make sense. But this bird knows that's how to do it. Oh, by the way, let me back up. You can see they come back up through Jamaica, Cuba, Florida, and go on. But to get down there, they take this other route. Now, how does the Blackpool Warbler know that a jet stream heading south exists out over the Atlantic? How does the Blackpool Warbler know precisely when to leave the East Coast to catch an air current that will take it to its wintering grounds? Are you beginning to see the imponderable impossibility of evolution to explain these behaviors? How does the Blackpool Warbler know that heading east will eventually bring it to South America? Okay, and here's the punchline question. How many generations of Blackpool Warblers drowned in the Atlantic before this critter got the programming glitch straightened out? How about who wrote the software for, this one you might be a little more familiar with, the incubator bird. I borrowed some of this from the Incredible Creatures That Defy Evolution DVDs. But in case you haven't seen those or haven't had the opportunity, there are more than 20 species belonging to the family Megapodidae. I think I got that right. Also known as the malleefowl or the brush turkey. The male builds a nest up to 15 feet high and 50 feet across on top of a pit of compost. I wouldn't want to be tasked with building a compost pile 15 feet high and 50 feet wide. But this bird does it. The female weighs about 2 pounds, yet she lays eggs that average about a half a pound, an average of 1 every 3 days for 7 months. Ladies, if you think that your pregnancy was tough, anybody ready to trade places? No. The male tends the nest during this entire incubation period, tends the nest. To ensure survival, the eggs must be kept at 91 degrees Fahrenheit, plus or minus only 1 degree Fahrenheit variation, and at 99.5% humidity. He does this by constantly monitoring conditions and adding or subtracting insulation, such as sand, dirt, whatever, as necessary. And if that wasn't enough, the chicks hatch fully ready to be self-sufficient, except for one problem. They're buried beneath a pile of sand and dirt and twigs. Not the most habitable place to be born, right? They have to dig their way out of the pile by laying on their backs, pecking and scratching at the debris, packing it under themselves with their wings, and repeating until they reach the top. So imagine, if you will, I'm not shaped like a baby bird, but, let's say you're a baby bird in the egg, and you pick your way out, and you look up, and it's like, what's this? And so you've got to scratch away at it, get it down, take your wings and kind of pack it underneath you, and scoot yourself up, and then do it some more, and pack it underneath you, and so until you emerge out of this pile of debris. The chicks know that they have to do this if they're going to survive. I mean, they could say, I'm heading east. Just going to go out this way. Maybe I'll reach the wall before. No, they know that they have to dig themselves out by going vertically. And then the next generation gets to do it all over again. Here's a picture of a brush turkey building his nest there, the incubator bird. How does a male incubator bird know that rotting compost gives off heat and humidity? How does a male incubator bird know how much compost in the nest will attract a female who will choose to lay her clutch in his nest? Because if he doesn't build the nest right, the female comes along, she says, "Forget you, buddy. I'm going to go find another guy." How does a male incubator bird know how to determine the precise temperature and humidity for the proper development of the eggs in the nest? Who calibrated his sensors? This male incubator bird has to know how to detect temperature and humidity and has to process that in his brain, which is another whole talk that I've just recently put together on continuous environmental tracking. But you have to have sensors, and then you have to have a logic circuit, which tells you how to analyze that data and then what to do about it. And this male bird has all that built in and programmed into his DNA, his anatomy. How do the newly hatched chicks know that they must unbury themselves before they die of exhaustion or suffocation? How can any reasonable person believe that all of this just happened by random, unguided genetic mutations over millions of years and wasn't programmed into the bird's brains at the beginning? And by the way, let me just say this. When you hear an evolutionist or a skeptic say, "Well, it just happened," just happen is not a scientific statement. It is a philosophical statement, okay? I could say that I just happened one day to see a magician pull a rabbit out of their hat. Does that mean the magician actually pulled a rabbit out of their hat? No. But it's a sleight of hand. It's a word play, okay? So you don't ever have to believe when you read something from some literature or something that says, and evolution just happened to produce this thing over millions of years, you can say, not going to buy it, not going to buy it. That's philosophy, that's not science. Who wrote the software for mother birds? This is not a yogurt-covered raisin in the birdie's mouth, okay? We're not trying to be disgusting here, but this is a reality, okay? Who wrote the software for mother birds? Baby birds sit in the nest and mostly just eat and you know what, okay? The buildup of fecal matter in the nest would cause problems with the following: overcrowding of the baby birds, the risk of septic infection, and the scent would attract predators. Many species of bird babies produce a fecal sac. Think disposable diaper. Think Huggies. The parent bird extracts the fecal sac and deposits away from the nest to prevent these problems listed above. I found a few examples of different types of birds on the internet, all in the process of disposing of those Huggies, okay? How do the parent birds know that keeping the Huggies in the nest would be a problem? They don't read Good Housekeeping magazines. They don't have their parent bird saying, "By the way, you better make sure you keep that nest, because if I come over and visit and you've got a problem here, then I'm not going to be happy with you." How do they know how to take this fecal sac some distance from the nest to minimize the risk of predators finding the nest through the scent? Some species of bird chickies deposit their Huggie on the edge of the nest for easier pickup and delivery. Who taught them how to do this? Some bird chicks turn around and present themselves, you can visualize that, when about to deliver a Huggie so the parent can intercept to prevent the fecal sac from even touching the nest. Now, most of us at some time in our life, how many of you have ever in your life come across an empty abandoned bird's nest? Raise your hand. Okay. Oh, a lot of you have. Okay. Have any of you ever run across an empty nest that was dirty or contaminated? No, they're always clean. So mother birds across the whole bird family, kind, know how to do this. Who wrote the software for birds in general? Jeremiah 8:7 says, "Even the stork in the sky knows her appointed seasons, and the dove, the swift, and the thrush observe the time of their migration. But my people do not know the requirements of the Lord." Matthew 23:37 says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I would have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." How sad. But you all came out this morning to support the Design Science Association, so I'm sure that these passages do not describe you. Okay. Let's continue. Who wrote the software for electric eels? Electric eels. The scientific name is the Electrophorus electricus. Sounds like Spartacus. Sounds like the name of a movie, right? They live in shallow, muddy areas of the Amazon and Orinoco rivers in South America. It is not a true eel. It is more closely related to a catfish. They must surface every 10 minutes to breathe atmospheric air. They can reach 8 feet in length and weigh up to 40 pounds. They have about 6,000 electrocyte cells that make up 80% of its body, each one generating about 15 hundredths of a volt, which in total can generate about 600 volts. The shock from an eel can knock a horse off its feet. Since they have poor eyesight, they can produce a low-level charge up to 10 volts to enable them to see at close range. Say what now? They produce a low-level charge which enables them to see. I have a video which will explain how that works. The female will lay up to 17,000 eggs in her lifetime. Eels live about 15 years in the wild and about 20 in captivity. To stun their prey, they must bring their head and tail into close proximity to it before discharging the electric shock. Now here's something else that's very unusual. The shock originates from the positive end at the head through the water to the tail at the negative end.
Put yourself in the eel's place in the Amazon, where it would actually live. If they're searching for things hidden among rocks or in plants, having this ability to cause involuntary motion would be very useful in a way to reveal prey to them while they're hunting. They give off a pair of these high voltage pulses, basically what you could call a doublet. And that is the perfect stimulus to cause a massive whole body twitch. That twitch is the cue to give away the position of the prey to the eel, which is very sensitive to slight water movements. So it'll attack a very slight water movement. They were acting like a taser, essentially causing involuntary muscle contractions to freeze up the animal so it couldn't move. The eel is remotely activating the motor neuron output that activates muscles. So they're essentially reaching into the animal's nervous system with their electric charge and remotely controlling their muscles through their peripheral nervous system, which I think is pretty amazing.
So the initial low voltage shock stuns the critter, causing it to twitch, which then gives away its position, so then the eel can zoom in and knows how to find its prey. But I like the way he described it. He says they're basically reaching into the victim's nervous system and controlling it so that it can paralyze it long enough for the eel to get over and gobble the thing up. How did the early evolving electric eel learn how to control its electrical discharge? If it just started setting off random electrical impulses, and randomness is the key to evolution, right? Because nothing is guided, nothing is directed. So if a critter like an electric eel had the ability, the physical ability, which is complicated enough to generate electricity, how does it know how to harness that electricity to use it in the proper sort of way? How do the baby eels, as they mature, learn how to hunt using their ability to stun their prey since the adults are not around to teach them. That information has to be passed down somehow. How did eels learn how to send out the doublet shock, and how did they learn that it would cause an involuntary movement in any nearby prey? Again, the parents aren't around to teach them this, but they know it. They know how to make all of this stuff work because that information has been programmed into them and not on a 5 1/4-inch floppy disk. How do eels know how to then follow up by effectively sending the electric shock that paralyzes its prey? All these questions. You almost feel sorry for evolutionists at this point, don't you? You know, if they had answered this. Who wrote the software for the archer fish? Has anybody here heard about the archer fish? A few people, all right. Well, a few people more are going to learn a little bit about them. There are 10 species in the genus Toxotes. They live in fresh and brackish waters from India to northern Australia. The adults typically reach a length of about 5 to 7 inches, not very big. Unlike almost every other variety of fish, most common food source is found above the water surface. Archer fish do not typically leap out of the water to catch its prey. Oh boy, where are we going with this? How does the archer fish get its dinner? You're about to discover. The archer fish shoots a jet of water from its mouth at the desired object, dislodging the insect from its perch. Since the eyes of the archer fish do not break the surface of the water, and as you can see, his eyes are down there, he's shooting up there, it can shoot a precise jet of water up to 10 feet above the water surface. The fish is 5 to 7 inches, and it can shoot a jet of water up to 10 feet above the water surface. To maximize, this is cool, this part. To maximize effectiveness, the latter end of the jet travels faster than the leading end. Okay, so figure this out. When he starts to shoot the jet, it's shooting at a certain velocity, and it's heading out. As he gets near the end of his jet, it's going faster so that the tail end reaches the head end right at the time it's supposed to hit its target. So it's not a stream, it's a ball to knock that little bug off of its perch. Typical preferred angle is 75 degrees, but it can shoot with accuracy between 45 and 110 degrees. So 45 is this, 110 would be like that. And this little fish, this little 5-inch to 7-inch fish, knows how to do that. But it gets even more complicated than that.
Think of the archer fish as a fastball pitcher, except that the distance to home plate changes with each batter. Plus, a baseball holds its shape, and the archer fish has to shoot a jet of water. But researchers have found that the archer fish can control and shape that jet in a way that no other creature does. To study this technique, 2 researchers from the University of Bayreuth in Germany first spent about a year training archer fish. The fish had to shoot water from just the right spot in the aquarium so high-speed cameras could catch the action. What the scientists found was that whether the target was at about 8 inches, or 16 inches, or even 24 inches, the drop that slammed the target, that bullet at the end of the jet, came together for maximum impact at just the right moment. So how does the fish do it? It doesn't just spit harder. It opens and closes its mouth in a way that varies the speed of different parts of the water jet. Quite a trick. And humans use water jets for all kinds of purposes. This new understanding of the archer fish technique could lead to improvements in everything from surgical tools to fire hoses.
How did the early evolving archer fish eat before it acquired its ability to fire water bullets? How does the archer fish know how to compensate for the refraction error caused by looking at an object above the water? We call it the refraction differential. Remember in school we did the thing where you have the glass of water, you put the straw in or the pencil in, and it breaks it up? This little fish underwater can look up and knows how to compensate for that refraction differential. We can't even do that. How does the archerfish know how, well, I mean, some people can, I suppose, but how does the archerfish know how to vary the speed of the water jet so as to deliver the maximum impact on its target? How do archerfish raised in captivity from birth learn this ability without being taught by their parents? This little fish is amazing. But what's amazing to me is to think that it can turn it 110 degrees and fire bullets backwards over its head. Very cool. Who wrote the software for the Opu Alamo? Not Alamo, Opu Alamo. The scientific name is Lintipes concolor. It is found in and around the islands of Hawaii and is Hawaii's only native freshwater fish. The adult grows to be about 5 inches long, a little bit smaller than the archerfish. The female lays her eggs near the source of a stream, much like salmon do. We know a little bit about that, being in the Pacific Northwest. It has a special set of fins between its front dorsal fins that act as a suction cup. Whoa, where are we going with this? To reach spawning grounds, the female must ascend Akaka Falls. What is Akaka Falls? It is a 440-foot sheer vertical cliff face. Here is a picture of the waterfall. And this little fish has to climb that rock wall surface behind the falls. Now, that little suction cup type fin, I'll point to this one here, is this one right here between its pectoral fins there. You're probably curious to see how it does it. Please say that you're curious to see how it does it. There's no audio to this one, just video. Now, they had this, this is like not really a reenactment, but this obviously not filmed at the waterfalls because the waterfall would have water coming down. But they were able to show you how this little fish, using this suction cup right here on its front, is able to maneuver itself up the waterfall. So, how did this fish and other fish like the salmon know that it had to return to the same stream it was born to spawn the next generation of fish? How did this fish know that it had an anatomy capable of climbing a 440-foot tall, wet, sheer rock wall face? Oh, look at this little thing I got here. I wonder what that's for. How did this fish learn the technique of how to climb a 440-foot wet, sheer rock face? How many generations of Opu Alamo were pounded to death at the base of the Akaka Falls before it ever, through random, accidental, undirected genetic mutations, achieved this knowledge and ability? Who wrote the software for orcas? The scientific name is Orsinius orcus. Inhabit all oceans from the Arctic to the Antarctic, mostly prefer coastal areas. It is not a true whale. It is the largest member of the dolphin family. They communicate by means of high-pitched whistles, pulsed calls, and low-frequency pops, and also by touches and gestures. Well, that sounds rather complex. They live in pods of 3 to 100 and can represent up to 5 generations in a pod. They employ a unique method of hunting by herding schools of fish. How do they do that? When encountering a school of, for example, herring, the orcas begin swimming in a circle. They flash their white bellies and blow bubbles to form a wall to force the herring tighter together. Herring don't like bubbly walls. As the herring come near the surface, the sea appears to be boiling with the fish. The orcas slap the ball of fish with their tails, which stuns several of them at a time, allowing the orcas then to feed at will, because the little herring can swim and maneuver a lot faster than the big orca. So here's a picture of how they do that. How did the very first orca hunting party get organized? How did the orcas devise the grammar and syntax for their language that they employ to communicate with each other? Oh, we're talking grammar and syntax. We're talking some high-order stuff. And this all gets programmed into the critters. How did early orcas come to know that herring and other fish don't like to swim through walls of bubbles? If evolution were true, how did orcas get enough food to eat for thousands of years as they learned how to function as a team to maximize the catch of fish while spending the least amount of energy? Who wrote the humpback? Who wrote the software for humpback whales? Humpbacks are true baleen whales. They can easily breach their entire 40-ton mass out of the water. We've probably seen pictures of that or videos of that. The males sing songs which carry underwater for hundreds of miles, are picked up by other males, and they change every year. In addition to eating krill, which are small shrimp-like critters, they also eat small fish up to 1.5 tons a day. They employ a herding method similar to the orcas, but with some distinct differences.
But more impressive than the humpback's size is their intelligence and the sophisticated way they work together. The hunt begins as the whales dive beneath a school of herring, emitting high-pitched calls. In a panic, the fish flee to the surface, where the whales concentrate them by releasing columns of air bubbles. The bubbles act as a barrier. The fish will not swim through it. The whales coordinate their efforts, so the bubbles surround the herring. Finally, the pod leader emits a sound that cues all the whales to ascend with mouths open. A humpback can eat a ton of herring a day this way. Incredibly, each whale ascends in the same position, in the same pattern, time after time.
Did you catch where he said that each whale comes up in the same position at the same time each time they do this? That makes the Olympic synchronized swimming seem like nothing. How did the humpbacks learn to coordinate their amazing ability to corral the fish to make catching easier? Birds and whales are different in every regard, even according to evolution. That being so, how come the two types of animals most people associate with the ability to sing are birds and whales? Evolution makes the claim that marine mammals evolved from a land-dwelling animal that went back into the water and adapted itself to live in that environment. How many random, unguided, beneficial genetic mutations do you think it would have taken for that to happen? More than evolutionary time would allow for. It is impossible for the number of changes to happen genetically, and that's another whole talk on genetics, which we obviously don't do. You'll have to forgive me for this next part here, but being a Star Trek fan, talking about humpback whales, I'll take you back to 1986 and this brief video clip.
Admiral, there be whales here.
There be whales here. Who wrote the software for the loggerhead turtle? Loggerhead turtles, what about them? Scientific name is Caretta caretta. The nesting grounds are on the Atlantic coast from Georgia to Florida. The female loggerhead can weigh up to about 300 pounds during nesting season. Only about 1 out of every 4,000 Florida hatchlings lives to adulthood. That is a high mortality rate. Immediately after hatching, the young loggerheads begin an 8,000-mile migration into the Atlantic. Loggerheads born on Japan's beaches feed along the California coast. They return to the exact beach where they hatch to begin the cycle for the next generation. Over its lifetime, a loggerhead will migrate the oceans over 1 million miles. That's a lot of navigating. They navigate using a built-in compass, ... and GPS system to detect both latitude and longitude. GPS devices do not come about by random processes. But it is not just about the sensory ability to track latitude and longitude, which involves very complex mathematics. The loggerhead also has to have a logic circuit programmed into its turtle brain to interpret the GPS data. And then the loggerhead has to execute a response to the interpreted data. Again, this gets back to continuous environmental tracking. And Dr. Randy Galuza, who is the president and CEO of ICR now, is the kind of the foremost one leading that. How to study biology from an engineering perspective. To get back to the same beach they were hatched, the coordinates had to be imprinted at birth. Okay? The coordinates had to be programmed into the little turtle at birth and kept in storage for retrieval to migrate with the GPS data later when it becomes an adult. That involves some very complex math that I don't even want to go anywhere near. Here is the range of the different loggerhead turtles. And here's a short little video just to show you some things about them. So once in a while, their GPS does malfunction a little bit, but even the best ones of ours do too, right? Who wrote the software for the Japanese pufferfish? Sometimes he looks like this, and sometimes he looks like this. Who wrote the software for the Japanese pufferfish? The scientific name is Tetraodontidae. There are over 100 different species. Some can grow up to 4 feet in length. They can inflate themselves up to 3 times their size when they want to look menacing to keep other critters from eating them. They're listed as one of the most poisonous creatures on Earth, and they are. They're also considered a delicacy in Japan, and an expensive one too, because only highly trained chefs can prepare them so that it doesn't kill the person who's trying to buy the thing. And they have a most unique way of attracting a mate. And if I try to describe it to you, it'd only do so good. So Sir David Attenborough, who himself is an evolutionist, right? But he has got a video here that I want you to see. Some of you may have seen it before. If you haven't, you're in for a treat.
Unfortunately, this small Japanese pufferfish is dull, almost to the point of invisibility. But to compensate, he is probably nature's greatest artist. To grab a female's attention, he creates something that almost defies belief. His only tools are his fins. In his head, a plan of mathematical perfection. He plows the sand, breaking it up into the finest of particles. These shells aren't just rubbish to be removed. He uses them to decorate the bridges of his construction. He can't rest for more than a moment, but must work 24 hours a day for a week, or the current will destroy his creation. A final tidy up, and his masterpiece is complete. Nowhere else in nature does an animal construct something as complex and perfect as this. If this doesn't get him noticed, nothing will.
What some guys have to do to get a date. Is this not amazing? By the way, I learned recently that the pufferfish, when he's building his nest, never elevates himself above this. He always stays at ground level. So he never gives himself a bird's eye view, if you will, to look down to see if it looks okay. All of his construction is done at that perspective from down below. And yet he still accomplishes this. So let me ask you a few questions. Where in the world did this creature go to school? That's a pun. To learn how to create something as artistic and inspiring as his sand nest. Since the young juvenile males do not observe their father pufferfish when he makes his nest, they must acquire this knowledge from somewhere, and I would say from someone. Every observed scientific experiment confirms that knowledge transmission must come from an intelligent source. It cannot arise from random, undirected processes. Job 12, starting in verse 7, tells us, just ask the animals and they will teach you. Ask the birds of the sky and they will tell you. Speak to the earth and it will instruct you. Let the fish in the sea speak to you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. Let the fish in the sea speak to you. Boy, they sure can, can't they? Now let me ask you all a question. What do all of these incredible creatures have in common? Besides the obvious. Dun, 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 dun. They were all created on day 5. Genesis 1:20, and God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the sea, and let fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the 5th day. There are entire presentations just on butterflies and hummingbirds and other sorts of mammals like the dolphins. But now, that brings us to the big finale. Who wrote the software for the DNA molecule? Scientific name is deoxyribonucleic acid. I'm assuming most of you know this, right? Okay. The double helix of nucleotides support over 3 billion base pairs. I think they said now 3.2 is the latest approximation of exactly how many. Enough data to fill over 1,000 encyclopedia-sized books. The 4 nucleotide bases comprise the rungs of the helix, A, C, T, and G, adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine. The DNA component parts do not self-assemble without instructions from the DNA itself. So you can't build DNA unless you have DNA to tell it how to build DNA. Only 2 microns wide and about 6 feet in length, all the DNA in one human body would stretch from the Earth to the sun and back 41 times. And it's all packed into a little cell. Stephen C. Meyer, philosopher of science, has his PhD from Cambridge. He's no dummy. He's written several books. Darwin's Doubt. There's a video, Darwin's Dilemma, produced by Lustre Media, very good. He also has a book called Signature in the Cell, where he talks about DNA and the evidence for intelligent design. I'm going to let Dr. Stephen Meyer talk a little bit about it. The images you're going to see are computer generated, but they represent what actually takes place in the cell, but at a much more slowed down rate.
In 1957, Francis Crick first proposed that chemicals called bases along the spine of the DNA molecule function as alphabetic characters in a written language or digital characters in a machine code. This animation shows how this digital information directs protein synthesis. First, a large protein complex separates the tightly wound strands of the DNA to prepare it to be copied. During this process of transcription, a protein complex called a polymerase produces a single-stranded copy of the original instructions. Here we see this copy, a messenger RNA molecule, being constructed inside the polymerase as individual bases are positioned and added to the growing strand. Now we see the polymerase in action from the outside as it spits out the messenger RNA transcript. Next, this RNA transcript approaches and passes through a molecular machine called the nuclear pore complex, an information recognition device that controls the flow of information in and out of the cell's nucleus. Now we see the genetic assembly instructions on the messenger RNA approaching and arriving at a 2-part chemical factory called a ribosome, the site of protein synthesis. As the messenger RNA transcript passes through the ribosome, the process of translation begins. During translation, a mechanical assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids in accord with the instructions on the transcript. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell by molecules called transfer RNAs, which link specific sequences of bases to corresponding amino acids. The sequential arrangement of the amino acids determines the type of protein constructed. When the construction of the chain is complete, it is transported to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape required to perform its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is released into the outer cytoplasm to do its job in the cell.
What you saw there is just a small example of the types of processes that go on in every cell, in every creature, plant, animal, all the time. Darwin and all the learned men of his time thought the cell was nothing more than a simple blob of protoplasm. They had no idea of the existence of the DNA molecule, because that wasn't discovered until 53, or the incredible complexity not only of human cells, but the cells of every living creature. Yet, once his theory of evolution went public, people who wanted an excuse to disbelieve the Bible, remember that word excuse, right? To disbelieve the Bible now had a convenient story to allow them to dismiss the Creator. Dying. What is our conclusion? One of two possible reasons provide the best explanation for these phenomena. Either, against astronomical odds, they all just happened without thought or intention or design or purpose over millions of years of death and suffering, or they are the handiwork and traits of an all-wise, all-knowing, all-loving Creator God who has revealed himself in his creation that we might come to know him and find salvation. So then I ask you, which of the two options is the easiest to believe, makes the most sense, and has the best evidence to back it up? I agree. It's God. I told you I would provide you with some resources. These are the two main books that gave me the information to put most of this talk together. I don't know if I was hoping to find a few seconds to peruse the book table to see if you have these in stock, but if you don't, I was informed by Bruce Malone himself just last month that he will be coming to Oregon here, and I'm sure he'll be bringing copies of his book. He also has a new one out that hasn't quite been released yet, but keep your eyes open for that too. Inspired Evidence, Only One Reality, and Have You Considered? Evidence Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. Okay, so these two books, get a hold of these things. In fact, let me just take a moment to tell you. This book on the right, Have You Considered? I have a lady who has been a regular attendee of my meetings in Payson, Arizona, and she's been coming from the first meetings onward for all these years. And a couple years ago, she told me that things with her husband after 40 some odd years of marriage is falling apart, and he's just kind of giving up on God, giving up on his marriage and the whole thing. And she was obviously concerned about this. She came to the meeting. Bruce Malone was speaking. She bought his devotional book. She took it home, and she left it on the little end table next to the sofa. And sometime later, hubby came by, and he sat down, and he picked it up, and he started reading. And that day, he read half the book. The next day, he read the other half the book. That evening, he approached his wife and says, "Hey, dear, I've been very foolish. I want to recommit myself to my marriage. I want to recommit myself to God. I want to start coming back to church with you." She said later that this book not only saved her marriage, but it saved her husband as well. And that speaks for itself, I think. Resources. I also mentioned this, Dr. Joe Martin. These have been out for quite some time, but if you don't have them, you might want to look them up. Incredible Creatures That Defy Evolution. Also, Dr. Werner Gitt, this is an older picture of him. He's a few years older than this now. He was the director and professor of the Institute of Technology in Braunschweig, Germany. He has a book called In the Beginning Was Information. A Scientist Explains the Incredible Design in Nature. Answers in Genesis also produced a video of him speaking called In the Beginning Was Information. Another resource would be, goes back several years as well, Unlocking the Mystery of Life by Lustre Media. Another resource, if you want to get a little more technical, is this book by Douglas Axe called Undeniable. How Biology Confirms Our Intuition That Supports That Life is Designed. He wrote this book to basically say, can we make a scientific argument to say, when we see evidence of design, that we can know that we have evidence of design, not just, well, it looks designed, but maybe it's not. So he lays out a case for that. But I'm not going to get into that on this talk. That's for another talk. But again, we're here today because we want to make the Bible the foundation for our thinking in every area. Because as we looked at earlier, Romans 1:20 tells us that his eternal power and divine nature have what? Have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made To what end? So that people are without excuse. And may we all continue to study creation so that our thoughts may be brought upward to our Creator, who is also our Savior, Jesus Christ. Thank you all.